Welcome everyone to our panel here, celebrating the new book, Sexuality for All Abilities, yay. This is our third and final panel. This one is with educators that all work in different areas with different types of students, and I think that's going to be really great to see what they all have to say. So we'll start by allowing them to introduce themselves, so we get a feel of what kind of work they each do and the students that they work with.
Sure. My name's Sarah. I've been a teacher for almost 17 years now. I currently teach 18 to 21-year-olds in the transition program, but I've taught everything K through age 21. So I've kind of done the whole gamut. I've been doing 18 to 21 for, I think this is my 9th year. And I was teaching sex education before we had the curriculum. I was kind of creating my own. And then the curriculum came along, and that's been so nice to be able to integrate that in. But yeah, and I have wide range of disability categories in the students that I serve. So yeah, just kind of a wide variety of kids. It's great.
Yeah, hi. So currently I work for Mad Hatter Wellness and work with Katie and Anna, teaching sexuality education to, kind of a wide range of ages. We've had groups in elementary schools all the way through. Anna and I have done classes on kind of your body as it ages. So I guess like 0 to 150 that you drink. I've been working with. Before Mad Hatter Wellness, I taught special education for about 12 or 13 years, primarily in high schools, and similar to what Sarah said, kind of making up my own sex ed as I went along, which is, not ideal. And so, yeah, now it's been super awesome to be a part of Mad Hatter and have a more, structured, evidence-based, supportive curriculum. So.
Mirroring Sarah, we both work at the same school, and it's really fun. We've been talking about the sexual curriculum as it's been developing and working with a lot of the same students. I usually have a lot of the guys at our school or those who are identifying as male. And I also have Federal Force setting students, which are more severe and profound students. So people with a lot more going on. And so I'm used to doing a lot of differentiation of our instruction and going at it with a whole bunch of different ways of describing it and repeating just about everything every day. I've been working in St. Paul for 17 years, and the first 2 were with kindergartners, and I worked my way up. And now I'm with 19 to 21-year-olds in the transition program and loving every day. Really, really enjoy working with these students. And I also have been able to help out with the development of this curriculum, being that Katie is my wonderful wife. And so she gets to bounce ideas off me, and I get to ask her what the heck I'm doing wrong, and life is good.
Hi, my name is Delilah. I work at the Indian Health Board of Minneapolis, which is a community clinic here in South Minneapolis in the Phillips neighborhood. I'm kind of new to sex ed, so I've been here for 2 years, and before that I had a career in research. So I teach sex ed to specifically American Indians. I am under the Family Planning Special Projects grant out of MDH. So I teach all ages. I do a youth group every summer. This is the second summer. I actually just started virtual education today. So I'm so excited. And then I go to a lot of outpatient treatment groups and here in the community. And then I will also visit like men and women's groups too. So sometimes there'll be like cultural groups that I'll go and visit throughout the community. So those are like mainly how I reach Native Americans. I really have an interest in trying to reach Native American children or youth or adults who may have disabilities. So part of that, it's just really hard to reach that audience. I do have like stipulations related to my grant where I can't teach in schools. So that kind of makes things a little bit more difficult, but I'm open to seeing like how we can like use some of my teaching methods on how I reach my community that way. And I've been kind of slowly kind of easing into that area. So
Yeah, cool. Well, and we love having your feedback on how we can be more inclusive in our work as well with our curriculum. And so it's great to have you. Well, thank you, everyone. And I'm wondering, maybe this next question can go right back to Delilah. But I want you to think about like a scenario or a reason, something that's come up in your classroom or in the program where you're working that made the need for sex ed apparent.
I teach to adults, so sometimes I see that some of the, like, I just hear a lot of myths. Like, people will have very interesting questions, or might not, it's like a half truth, you know, they know half of the information, but they don't know the full information. And sometimes I think that the most educated people I teach are 16 and 17-year-olds. And the reason I say that is because they are getting the education recently, and they're probably getting it where they remember it the most. And then I think a common thread for a lot of, I did some listening sessions last year, is that a lot of elders and people who are nearly elders. So elders in our community are people usually 55 and older. So people in that age range have a lot of, nobody ever talked about it. It was pretty much like, don't get pregnant. That's kind of it, you know, and I think that part of some of the sex education is changing for our youth, where they're learning more about sexuality and sex holistically than 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, but people are still falling through the cracks. So I think like hearing from the elders and saying like nobody talked about it, and then having like open conversation about it, or like just setting like providing a safe place to talk about it is like one of the, I think the biggest things, because that's what I heard, in like nobody's having conversations about it in the community, especially with like adults, like elders and stuff. So it's taboo for sure.
When I first started teaching it, I was really floored by how many people hadn't had comprehensive sex education. And especially at age 19, coming into my class and not knowing how babies were made, and not knowing anything about safe sex or even what different sexualities were. It was really eye-opening. And when we got into it, it was, I mean, just the questions they had were really making me step back and think, wow, we need more of this. We need to really take on, you know, to every single person in our school, we need to make sure they have this education before they go out. Because our main task is to teach self-advocacy. And without sexuality education, there's no self-advocacy when it comes to relationships. And it's just so incredibly important.
Well, when I was in school, a long time ago, we didn't have sex education. I grew up in a small town, and so it was don't have sex. That was our sex education. We did get to watch a video with Sinbad, the comedian, dressed as a condom, so I guess that was fun. But nobody talked to us about relationships and about sex and about, you know, pregnancy, all of that stuff. And then when I was student teaching in high school in St. Paul, my cooperating teacher, it was a health class of all females. And she kind of threw me to the wolves and said, okay, we're talking about STDs this week. You're going to teach the lesson. And I was a little innocent back then. And it just really opened my eyes that, okay, one, these girls know way more than small town little Sarah does. And two, this is important to talk about, because it wasn't just talking about sex. It was also talking about, well, my boyfriend did this to me and I don't think it's okay, but I don't know. And then, you know, so I didn't really teach it when I was in high school. And then when I was in elementary, it wasn't talked about. And then when I moved to the school I'm at now, the transition school, I noticed that there was a lot of relationship drama, a lot of, especially girl drama, relational bullying. And I noticed that a lot of our girls didn't have, like, I grew up going to slumber parties and doing all that kind of stuff. And none of them had that experience of doing their nails and listening to music and just chatting. So I asked my principal if we could just do that once, if I could just take 2 hours and just whoever wanted to come could come. We threw on some Adele, we threw on, you know, like all this music. I brought, people were donating nail polish and like hair stuff and makeup. I used to do Mary Kay, so I brought in all my makeup samples, and we had a blast. They had so much fun listening to music, just talking, doing each other's nails, and it kind of evolved from there. Then it was like, well, maybe we'll just turn this into a class. Okay, well, let's talk about what happens when we're mad at our friend. You know, do we say you're not my friend anymore and turn everyone against them? What happens when I have a crush on someone? How do I act? What happens if someone touches me and I don't like it? And it just kind of slowly evolved. And I started picking up things here and there, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was trying to find stuff on the internet, and that's when I realized there's nothing out there, really. At the time, there was nothing for people with disabilities and sex education. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, but there wasn't a lot to choose from. And some of the stuff was really kiddish, just kind of talked down. Some of it was just, way over where we were starting. And then, you know, Dusty came and talked to me because he was noticing the same thing with the young men. And then it just kind of just all happened, and it was fantastic. And I mean, I love the time I get to spend with that class. We spend more time talking about the relationship end, but it's such a wonderful time because we work really hard to create that safe space, and so many of the students feel comfortable coming to me now with questions. I'm like, I don't know the answer, but let's figure it out. And it's just been wonderful. And I think it's so important. I actually wrote my master's final paper about sex education and disabilities because it is a topic that is ignored, or people pretend it doesn't exist, or people with disabilities are asexual. So we don't want to talk about that. And that's not true.
You know, I think it's really great just knowing both your class and Dusty's class. They're both very informal yet formal. There's a curriculum you're using, but yet they are allowed to ask any question, and they're allowed. We know so many of our students with disabilities have fewer social opportunities.
Yes.
And so this is their time to just practice that. And I think that's just, it's wonderful that they have that opportunity with, and so that's really great.
Sometimes
Can I piggyback on something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So since Sarah has that class going on the other side of the school, and then I have the opposite side, a lot of times we can work with each other, you know, after class to say, okay, we got to work out this next thing because this is going to hit you next week when this relationship blows up. And it's so cool to have that relationship and also know the curriculum together, and then we can snuff out those fires as they go and then plan ahead too. So it's been really nice with this curriculum to be able to be so loose with it, but also be able to dig right into exactly what we need to talk about. It's very adaptable. I like it a lot.
Yeah, like sometimes I'll have a lesson planned, but then I'll hear whisperings in the hallway, and it's like, oh, we're gonna actually talk about this week, because there's some stuff going on. So switch it up.
Yeah, and also helpful that it's nice when multiple teachers in the program or staff are also using the curriculum and having these conversations. And so then to the students, you're not that weird teacher that talks about sex with everybody. Everyone, more than one person is having these conversations about relationships and boundaries, which is so great. And the other thing that I just was going to say that I think everyone's mentioned is that it's not just this thing about pregnancy or STIs or sex that came up to make the need for sex ed apparent. It was so much more than that. And I think that's a really important thing to think about. Leah, what else do you want to share? I know so much was already shared, but what else?
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said. I will tell a funny anecdote quick. So my very first moment of teaching, I was 22. I got to the school I was going to start working at, and a couple of teachers had to go to an IEP meeting, and they're like, just watch this classroom where they're silent reading, like, don't worry about it. Everyone reads for 45 minutes, just sit with them, read a book. And I was like, oh, great, I can do that. And I'm like 22, got my like sweater on, feeling great. And like immediately, as soon as the teachers leave, one of the students is like, are you gonna talk to us about butt sex? And I was like, oh, no, I'm not. But then I totally had a moment where I was like, but I guess I should be able to like answer those questions if I'm gonna be a teacher. So I had like a panic moment of being like, oh my gosh, I'm so unprepared for teaching. I thought we were just reading. And then of course everyone spiraled into like yelling out other things that they wanted me to talk about. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then afterwards, it was really nice because the student who started it was like, just so you know, we were just testing you and you didn't freak out, so you can like still be our teacher. And I was like, yeah, thanks. But I was like, oh my goodness, I need to go home right now and like learn everything I can about sex ed, because it's definitely going to come up again if it came up in the first 1 minute of being a teacher.
And it probably wasn't a sex ed class.
No.
It's like,
reading.
oh, that's great. Yeah, very interesting. Well, let's, Leah, why don't you you answer the next one. Let's go right back to you. So just thinking about some positive outcomes of teaching sex ed, some good stuff that's come out of this for you.
Oh man, well, like personally, it's so fun. I feel like talking about penises and vulvas and body changes and puberty, and like that's my jam. So I feel like being able to do it professionally has been very fulfilling personally, but also just how many other parts of people's lives it can affect. So when you talk to students about, their healthy, being able to set boundaries, like setting boundaries is important in all parts of your life, not just like, relationships, or not just romantic relationships. So seeing students be able to be like, oh, these are all like, setting boundaries, saying no, asking for consent for things like, outside of like, can we make out, but like, oh, you actually get to like decide what happens in your life and you get to make those choices, I think can be really powerful, not just with sex ed, but for our whole lives. I think about that a lot. I wish someone would have like told me that I could like set boundaries. Like now I'm like, working it out in therapy when I'm 36, but it's cool when like, 4-year-olds can do that. Like, oh, this is so important for everyone at every age. And so I just think that, the students who I have taught, both when I was a high school teacher and then now the people that we're working with Mad Hatter Wellness, it seems like just like so many positive things outside of just sexuality, but that it really encompasses. I think Delilah used like holistic sexuality, and so thinking about so many other parts of their lives that benefit from having those, self-advocacy and self-determination skills.
Great, thank you. Delilah, how about you? Some positive outcomes of teaching sex ed, this newer thing for you.
One of the main things that I always try to think of as like a Native person and thinking about sexual health is how I can relate sexual health to like storytelling and teaching, because that is like a really strong part of like when you think about Native American epistemology. So how we knew things and how we shared knowledge was through storytelling. And storytelling is very important in American Indian history. We are like in our ways of knowing, and like we learn about our creation, we learn about how to walk in harmony and with the earth, and how to be a good relative. And when I think about, like, when I say relative, I'm not like saying like I'm gonna be a good sister, being like a good person. How do I be a good person? So there are teachings, but how did we teach about sexual health? I really have a really strong interest in that. And there, I think that is one of the ways that a positive thing for me is I've been able to explore what that really means. And it's hard because those stories aren't easily or readily available, because usually our elders tell us these stories and they're passed down. So I've learned a lot about that, and I've got to meet a lot of community members and how they think about how sexuality and sexual health was like shared. I mean, and unfortunately with that comes a lot of trauma. So like, it's really just being able to work through that and empower like Native people to take care of their sexual health. So that's like one of the biggest things is I always just try to like make people advocate for themselves and be aware of their bodies. And unfortunately, American Indians have some of the highest like STD rates, and there's big disparities in STDs. And then also there's really high rates of like unplanned pregnancies. So there's just like the need in my community for sex education is just so profound. And I'm not saying that like, I think by saying that, I'm not saying that there isn't a need in other communities, because there is. I just think there's just so many other social determinants related to that can't be ignored. So, I mean, I think the positive part is being more connected with my community, being more connected with myself as a Native American person. And now, anytime anybody in my community needs anything related to sexual health, they're like, do you know Delilah? She's doing that work. So like the community here in South Minneapolis and in St. Paul is not very big. So as far as the American Indian community, so people know who I am and they know I'm doing the work. Somebody just messaged me the other day and they said, will you come and talk about healthy sexuality with my group? And I said, yeah. And he goes, how much do you cost? I go, I'm free. You don't have to pay me anything. And he's like, what? Not even on the weekends or evenings? I go, no, that's my job. It doesn't matter. I will flex my time to come and teach, and my services are free. So, you know, I think that was part of it, where it's like, well, people need to know that I will come and do this for free. You don't need to pay me. Like, it's my job to do this, especially if it's like, really, he teaches a two-spirit group, which I wanted to talk about later in the how you support LGBTQ people. But so
yeah, let's make sure we go back to that for sure. Well, and I just look forward to when you are doing these groups for disability.
I hope that happens in the future. Sometimes it's just it's like trying to reach like the ultra hard to reach, because they're both really hard to reach audiences. I assume that it's hard to reach people who have some sort of disability, and then you add on another hard to reach category, it's like they're even more hard to reach.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, intense stuff. Thank you, Delilah. Sarah, how about you? Something positive outcomes of teaching sex ed.
I think that, you know, the students that I've had in there, they feel like they have someone they can go to with those embarrassing questions. You know, I work really hard to make sure that I build that foundation of trust, that, you know, we always say what happens in girls group stays in girls group. That's our number one rule. And so, you know, that's been really positive. I mean, I had one student, she'd always come and tell me when her period started. She's like, just so you know. I'm like, okay, awesome. Glad to know, thanks. And so I think that has been really positive, and it's helped me build a rapport with students that I might not normally have had that interaction with. And, you know, it just kind of gets me outside of my comfort zone a little bit too. So it's helped make me a better educator. Yeah. And it's just been really fun to see students opening up and not being embarrassed to talk about penis and vagina and getting your period and, you know, like bra shopping. You know, there's giggles at first, but it's just really exciting when we get to that point where we can have those open discussions, and it's not just giggling, it's like an actual discussion. And I think it's so important for my students to have that as well, because the hope is that after, you know, they leave us, that I always tell them to find a person outside of school that you can go and talk to about that stuff. So it's really important. So, trying to transfer it over.
That's so great. And I think, knowing that some of our students, that they have these limited opportunities, that they also have limited people that they trust. Many of them do. And I think for them to be able to build that trust with you, it's like win-win all around, because it's probably going to make your teaching life easier in other areas, because they might not act up as much because you're a person they trust. And so it's like, oh, this is great. It's win-win all around. Dusty, how about you? A positive outcome of teaching sex ed?
Oh, there's so many. It's hard to narrow it down. I mean, building the relationships with the students is huge. I have a lot of students with significant negative behaviors that, very violent or having a lot of outbursts socially. And getting them all into the room and then starting our circle of relaxation and breathing with the breathing ball and the sparkle ball, and passing the drum around and having them do nonverbal, telling us how they're feeling with the drum. It's opened up so many doors into so many students and relationships that I never thought possible, because we do establish that trust. And we know that we're not going to go talking about whatever happens in the classroom out in the hallways. And so then in regards to that, I get students coming in all throughout the day, just kind of hovering around the door. And I say, okay, come on in. What's going on? If you don't feel comfortable talking about it, write a letter and put it in our little question box next to the door, and we'll get to it right away, or come back at office hours. And I mean, I feel like I'm constantly giving relationship advice and talking through, what it means to be a self-advocate, what it means to say no and have control over your body. I mean, the biggest thing we teach every single day is, who does your body belong to? And the first 3 weeks, it's always my mom or my dad or my girlfriend, and it's like, okay, let's talk about it again. By the time we get halfway through the semester, they're all saying their body belongs to them and they are in charge of their body. We do daily check-ins. Who's doing your laundry? What comes out of your body belongs to you. Are you taking care of that? And, once they finally say yes, and it's no longer mom's doing my underwear, I know I've gotten somewhere with one of my students. And it's like every one of those little things is just another milestone in teaching this curriculum, and it's just another reason to keep doing it over and over again. I wish I could teach this all day, every day. It's amazing. And working with virtual learning now, we still have to figure out how the heck we're going to do it, because it's different when people pop back on and off and you see their face for a moment. It's going to be hard to get that connection, but hopefully we can still do it.
And I think you can. I mean, I think it's just returning back to the screen, returning back to the classroom, the school. I mean, that you keep showing up for that person. And I think that's really great. So let's go back to Dusty then. So the next question, we'll start with him, is so you shared all these positives, that there's so many positives. What about difficult stuff, the difficult parts of teaching sex ed? What's been hard for you?
Parents. No offense, parents, but a lot of parents have a really hard time letting go of the reins. They want to see their person with a disability as their sweet little child and their baby forever. And they neglect to see that their student or their child is growing up and wanting to have relationships. And they don't want to be mommy's little helper forever. They want to have their own families and explore what it means to be them and what it means to be a sexual being. And so either getting them to sign off on letting them be in the class, or just having them work through some of the things we talk about in school. I'd spend a lot of time talking to parents and then getting them into an understanding position. So then they're like, oh yes, okay, please do this. Because once they realize that we're gladly teaching this stuff, and then they don't have to be so worried about it, they just need to follow along and be on the same page. It makes it easier for them in the long run. So that's
right.
One of the hard things.
Yeah, definitely. Leah, how about you?
Yeah, definitely agree with Dusty that it can be tricky navigating parent relationships or kind of answering parent questions along the way. We talk about that a lot, that while we're teaching we might be teaching young people, that like also we're supporting their parents in this process too. Like I think Delilah mentioned too, that like a lot of their parents didn't get sex ed, and so their information might be inaccurate also, or they're like, it might be taboo or feel uncomfortable for them. So we're kind of supporting a whole family approach, which can be sometimes hard. And then I think too, just like part of our job oftentimes means that people tell us really hard things. And so that can be just kind of a day-to-day hard thing where there's a lot of, reports of abuse or assault or unhealthy relationships or stuff that you kind of have to be able to not take on and be able to kind of process your own trauma around other people's trauma. And I think that can be hard if you're not in a supportive environment to talk about.
Do you have a suggestion for how to, because you've been teaching this for a long time and taking it all on, and how do you get through that? How do you move through all that?
Strong recommendation to have either a therapist or someone that you can talk through process situations that happen. I think having a team of people, like I know I have Katie and Anna, sounds like Dusty and Sarah have a good relationship where you have people that you can say like, hey, this happened today. Maybe you don't give all the details, but there are people that can process that with you. So you're not processing it with the person who's having the hard time, but that you also have someone that you can kind of talk through with that.
So just finding some routine to let it go. Yeah, that's great. Delilah, how about you? What's tough, difficult parts?
I think that, I teach such a wide range of people that I kind of have come into getting tough questions. So I go to an inpatient treatment group and it's a mixed group of men and women and people who have struggled with substance abuse. And there's sometimes dysfunctional things related to sexual health that are paired with substance abuse. So that's kind of complicated to sort those things out with this person. And then also getting questions that you don't know if they're serious questions or if they're trying to test you, like Leah, when they're like trying to talk about anal sex or something. So like I get really weird questions where like somebody's trying to make me uncomfortable. So, but that usually doesn't work very well, but I usually am thrown off at first. So, and then there's a lot of American Indian people experience a lot of violence in their life, and that's really unfortunate, and it's true. So we're talking about violence, sexual violence. So a lot of sexual health can be triggering to all people, but if you have somebody that's have had a lot of trauma in their life, I had an elder woman, probably in her late 50s. I was teaching this class and she relived a sexual assault in front of the group. So it was like, that was really hard. We all like stopped, like it was a small group, but I was really glad because there was an elder in residence there who like stopped and we like, she like gave her some traditional medicines and things related to that. And then also like the parent thing, like I'm doing a class right now where we mailed out packages. So I had 26 youth signed up, 13 per week, 9 came. I like sent them the full agenda, was like, this is what we're teaching in case the parent wanted to look, because the youngest that we accepted into the group was 11 to 13. So some people think that their 11-year-old isn't ready for a condom demonstration, but some people think that their kid is ready for that. So I sent them a dental dam and 2 condoms in this education because I am going to do a condom demonstration. And one of the youth goes, "Is this supposed to be in here?" And I go, "Yeah, it's supposed to be in there." So that was like, I wanted to make sure they knew what they were getting themselves into. But one of the things is that since there are so many disparities in the American Indian community related to sexual health, it's like the earlier the better. some youth are like in this community are getting pregnant when they're 15. You know what I mean? They don't know anything about practicing safe sex. They don't know how to get condoms. They're too afraid to get condoms. They're too afraid to get put on birth control. So that's hard, is like getting people ready to accept the information. Like Dusty was saying, like we're gonna move forward with this. So
Thank you. Sarah, how about you? Difficult parts of teaching sex ed?
You know, I'll also say parents, but another thing that comes is I'll get the student that's like, I already know that. I saw that on TV, or I saw that on the internet. That is really difficult, because it's like, okay, we have to remember that what we see online, what we see in the media, like in social media and on TV and the movies and music videos, that's not always real. And so just trying to bridge that gap between reality and what they see Rihanna do. You know, I mean, I remember when the song S&M came out, and so many questions about that. Oh my gosh. And so just, you know, like, well, so-and-so, in this show, so-and-so's boyfriend did this, and so it's okay. No, it's not. You know, that wasn't portrayed very well in the show. And so just kind of trying to overcome the misconceptions and the outright lies that are out there about what a healthy relationship is, what a healthy sexual relationship is, that they see. You know, and then online dating. I have a lot of my young women that do online dating, and trying to help them navigate that. No, we don't give our address out. No, we don't meet them by ourselves at their car. You know, that's been really difficult also, because add in the cognitive disability, and it's really hard to get them to understand just how serious that is. So yeah, it's just kind of a bunch of stuff with my ladies. But yeah, a lot of online things. It's like, nope, that's not, it's not good there, honey. I know that so-and-so did it, but that was fake.
Knowing that all four of you brought up the parent piece, it's, you know, every parent is coming from a different place, and but we know that sex education benefits everyone. So how can we help to get more of those students? How can we help parents feel comfortable when they're just loving up their kid, and they want their person to be safe? Most of the time, that's what it is they just want them to be safe. And I don't know how to process this. So what, does anyone have anything to share? Like, how can we help parents with that? Yeah, Delilah.
You know, when I first started coming on, like, I teach pretty comprehensive sex ed. I talk in depth about stuff. I don't glaze over things. I talk about fear and shame, and I call them out specifically. And I think me coming into this position, I thought there'd be more resistance than there really was. It was my perceived, like, elders aren't gonna like this. Parents aren't gonna like this. And then I find out that, like, more people are on board with what I'm doing than what I really thought. And that I teach in such a different setting though, because like I have more of a, like, youth come to me, like I put the information out and then they come to me. So it's like I'm not in a school setting,
So
but
chosen.
Yeah, but I also feel like sometimes I go to groups, like when I go to groups, that sometimes they don't know I'm coming, or they're unaware of what I'm going to talk about. And then I teach parent type stuff, and a lot of people are even really receptive to some of the tips I have for parents about start early, start often, you know, use correct body parts, names for body parts, use medical term language, say it out loud. And I talk about why that's important. And I think when I talk about that protective piece that you said, where people, they're really on board after that, you know. I would say that the American Indian community here is pretty progressive though. And I think Minneapolis is pretty progressive in general. So I think that we're really lucky in that sense, because the farther you get out, of any city in a rural area, the more conservative it gets. So I
Right.
think we have a good environment here, which allows us to do that. But I'm not saying that some people aren't like, I'm not on board with what you're doing,
Mhm.
you know.
Right. And every community is going to be a little different. I do, one thing I do want to say is we know that most parents are very supportive of comprehensive sex ed. I think the latest number I saw was like 95% of parents support comprehensive sex ed. But the 5% that might not support it are a little louder about it. And I think that's why it is a hard thing to deal with, because we're just wanting to support all of the students that we work with and give them all of the information so they can be the best self-advocate that they can for themselves, right? And teaching this sex education is a part of that. And so it's hard with that. Does anyone else have any other tips for dealing with parents? Yeah, Sarah.
So one thing that I've noticed over the last 10 years is that parents have become a little more okay with it. I mean, I get a lot less pushback than I did when I first started doing this 10 years ago. But, I always try to make sure that usually with my students, I typically know which parents are going to be the after you get to know your kids for a while. And so talking to them, just letting them know exactly what it is, showing them, the curriculum, like these are the topics we're going to cover. We're going to do it very respectfully. We're not going to just sit in here and, just use slang and, make it dirty. It's going to be a good talk, a good conversation that you can continue at home if you feel comfortable. Otherwise, we'll do it in here, so just kind of helping them be more comfortable with it as well. And then typically after about the first month, they see that their student is really enjoying the class and feels comfortable. And then that puts them at ease. As long as their student is comfortable, typically the parent then will become comfortable.
Well, and I'm hearing just a lot of communication. Parents don't want to be surprised. Just let parents know everything that you're doing, when you're doing it, how you're doing, sending home ideas, sharing documents. I think that's really helpful. Well, I do want to, I have one more question that I really want us to get to before we close up shop. And this is, so thinking about students who identify as LGBTQ in your classrooms and in the programs that you're working with, how do you support those students and the people? So anyone want to start us out? It's free for all, I guess.
I can start, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I make sure to check my language. So I'm using correct pronouns, and I'm asking what pronouns people would like to use. I'm checking my bias. If I am used to a hetero relationship, and when I'm teaching, I keep referring to people as, married couple and wife and husband, I know I need to open it up. I also try to make sure that my classroom is extremely welcoming and that all are welcome, and I hang signs up and posters and everything else, and also try to practice what I'm showing by talking about different viewpoints and multiple scenarios with different identities. It's been really nice doing that. And I have had fairly good feedback from my students so far. So I'm going to keep going with that, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Anyone else? Who wants to go next? You know what you want to say? Yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, I do a lot of the same thing. Instead of referring to boyfriend, girlfriend as a romantic partner. Mm-hmm. And we do talk about, it could be a boyfriend or girlfriend, but there are people who are non-binary. And so, what they prefer to be called or what they want to be called. And so just trying to make sure that I am using inclusive language, that I am, and one thing I get in that I always call it my girls group. And that's like a double-edged sword. And so I try to be really mindful of that also. And I found that the students are totally cool with talking about LGBTQI stuff. It's the staff in my room that typically have an issue with it. And so I've actually had to be kind of selective in which staff are in my room during my class.
I am glad you brought that up though. Do you have any, just like a little side note, tips on how, if your staff are biased, or how can you help with that?
Well, I had a staff go to the assistant principal and tell her that I was teaching really dirty, awful things in my class and that she should really come check it out because it wasn't okay. This was just a couple years ago. So I said, yeah, come on down, come in. I want you to come to my class, come to all of my classes. I would love for you to see what we do. Yeah, and so she did, and she goes, you're just talking about sex ed. I'm like, I know. And so, I always make sure that when a staff member is placed in my classroom for that class, I ask them, I said, these are the things we're going to be covering. Are you okay with that? It's fine if you're not, but I need to know now because we need this space to be welcoming. Everyone is welcome here. Everyone is accepted here. Everyone is loved here. And, it might make you uncomfortable. And if it does, that's okay. But if it's to the point where you are so uncomfortable you can't be in here, that's okay. I just would like to know now so that we can figure things out and maybe find a better classroom for you to be in. Then we can bring someone else in. And I've also had staff who use it as their personal therapy time.
Yeah.
Nope, that's not what we're talking about, but thanks for the little snippet and turning it back.
Yeah, I think that is I think we've all had that experience with staff asking questions and sharing stories. But I also hear you saying, and I think we would all agree, communication. Staff don't want to be surprised.
Yeah.
And it's not fair to them to be surprised. And so I think, the same way working with parents for sure. Yeah. So going back to people who identifies LGBTQ, Delilah, do you want to share? I know you had something about Two-Spirit.
Yeah, so I actually did the sexual orientation lesson today with a group of 11-year-olds. They were younger than I expected, actually. They're 11 through 13. So, I think that they've heard of this stuff before. So I'm not really not too really alarmed by that, but explaining it out can be challenging because it's like, how much of what you're talking about are they really grasping? But I did share 2 videos that are on YouTube about Two-Spirit identity. So some of the youth had heard of what Two-Spirit is. So Two-Spirit is a term that was developed in the 90s for Indigenous or Native people who identify with generally like same-sex relationships, but also Two-Spirit. There are different names for Two-Spirit people for some tribes. So it goes back, and generally these people were members of the tribe who were weavers and hunters. So they had there's a lot of gender roles within American Indian tradition, like men would do this, women would do this, but these Two-Spirit people would do both of them, and they were considered to be healers in their community. They were considered to be gifted, and I am always mindful to show those videos because I want people to understand that their tribe or their people may have recognized Two-Spirit people and they didn't shame them. They didn't make them feel bad for how they were. They were included in their tribe and they were also considered a gift. So I think that is a turn from what we see teachers saying, you're teaching bad stuff, where I'm trying to say, wait a minute, if you identify this way, we think that you're special and that we are inclusive to you. So I really it's a way of like turning people just to think about it in a different way and being like, this is how we as Native people see you. We don't see you as somebody who's sinning or somebody who's bad or wrong. And I think that really makes you because one thing that I do want to say, I know that we're running out of time here, is that I teach the same things to Native youth and Native people that you would teach to any other class. It's just the way I approach things is from a more culturally sensitive way. And I have been slowly reading through the Sex for All Abilities curriculum, and I even noted in there that a lot of the practices in that are very friendly towards Native American people in the ways that you're using instruments and the way that you're circling up, that it is can be used with Native people to relate to them. And I do like that about that it does have that to it. So but
Awesome. Thank you.
I also use like pronouns and stuff like that, but that's just one way where I try to like change the way they think about things.
Well, and I love that if you know you're special, you're amazing and wonderful because of that. And I think that's a really awesome way to put it. That's really great. Leah, LGBT students who identify as LGBT. Last question.
Oh man, all right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with what everyone else said, and just thinking about when we're talking about sex, like not talking about just, you know, like penis and vagina sex, but, you know, talking about like lots of different ways that people can be sexual, can experience sexual activity, can experience relationships, and it's just like the importance of like how that can change over time, you know. So you may have a relationship, you might identify, you know, as bisexual, you might that might change. And so I think being able to like really discuss kind of the fluidity of sexuality and gender and how you express yourself, how you express your gender might change throughout your life too. And so being able to kind of talk about it more as like a fluid process that changes throughout your life can, I think, help people be like, oh, okay, that like feels less like
Very comforting.
Very comforting, right? Like, oh, okay, this can change, or this might, or it might not, but that it has the ability to. Also, just making sure that when you're working with people who identify as trans, that you're not using their, you know, their dead name. Sometimes some teachers struggle with pronouns when they, you know, knew someone maybe as a girl first and then they transitioned. And like, yeah, that can be, sometimes you have to learn something new, but just learn it and then it's fine. And so I think just being really careful about those things, but then also like not making a big deal about it. I think that sometimes as teachers, when we make a mistake, it feels like a big deal to us. So then we're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I used your wrong pronoun. And then you just like make it about yourself and it's suddenly this big to do when you could have just been like, oh, sorry, and corrected yourself and not made it a big deal. I think that that's really important.
Well, I guess I know that we are ending, but I'm wondering about a tip for teachers, Leah, that, you know, if they are struggling with that and not sure, and then they're hard on themselves and like, what do you suggest?
Yeah. Well, one, it's not about you. And two, just, take a deep breath. If you make a mistake, just, you know, give yourself a second, take a deep breath and say, oh, I'm sorry. And then just correct yourself, or say like, oh, I'll remember that next time. And then remember it next time. Also, just get that quick and easy guide to they, them pronouns and queer identities. I feel like just read those the quick and easy series if you're wondering how to support people and using correct pronouns.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we're all constantly needing to learn more. So why not just do some more research, reading. Great stuff. Well, thank you everyone so much. This was really, really fun to be here with all of you in celebration of the new book, Sexuality for All Abilities, right here. So awesome. Yay.